What you're about to watch isn't just another tense exchange in a Senate hearing. It's a warning sign about how fragile free speech becomes when political power and government regulators start blurring their roles. Because this clash between Senator Amy Klobuchar and FCC Chair Brendan Carr isn't really about Jimmy Kimmel. It's about whether anyone in government gets to decide which voices are protected.
I would prefer to be asking questions about the bipartisan work that needs to be done on universal service and broadband and spectrum, and I'll ask that in writing. But the events of this year moved me to focus on free speech and our democracy. Chairman Carr, in 2022, you tweeted, "Political satire is one of the oldest and most important forms of free speech. It challenges those in power while using humor to draw more people into the discussion. That's why people in influential positions have always targeted it for censorship." Yes or no, do you still agree that political satire should be protected speech?
Yes, Senator. And whenever that satire or any other programming is over the public airways for broadcasters, there's a public interest standard, and there's a news distortion rule, a broadcast hoax rule.
You answered it, yes, and I'm just...
opportunity rule.
I'm going to go on.
That particular instance, too, had to do with speech on social media, where Biden administrations were trying to shut down political speech. Again, an area where there is no license, there's no public interest standard.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Robust, wide open speech.
I believe, too, that there is no place in chilling political satire. But after Jimmy Kimmel's monologue, you went on a podcast and suggested that ABC should take Kimmel off the air, saying, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Those were your words. Do you think it is appropriate to use your position to threaten companies that broadcast political satire?
I think any licensee that operates on the public airwaves has a responsibility to comply with the public interest standard, and that's been the case for decades.
I asked if you think it's appropriate for you to use your position to threaten companies. And this incident with Kimmel wasn't an isolated event. You've launched investigations into every major broadcast network except Fox. Is that correct?
I don't know if that's true or not. We do have investigations going on NPR and PBS. We have a number of investigations that are ongoing. I think if you step back over the years, I think the FCC has walked away from enforcing the public interest standard, and I don't think that's a good thing.
Okay, you brought up social media. So do you think it's appropriate for after a horrific murder and the stabbing of Rob Reiner and his wife, do you think it's appropriate for someone to say that it happened when they know better, reportedly due to the anger he caused others through his massive, unyielding, and incurable affliction with a mind-crippling disease known as Trump derangement syndrome? He was known to have driven people crazy by his raging obsession of President Donald J. Trump, with his obvious paranoia reaching new heights. Do you think that's appropriate for the President of the United States to do that? And if Jimmy Kimmel would have said that, would you have threatened to take him off the air?
Senator, look, Democrats on this dais are accusing me of engaging in censorship, and now you're trying to encourage me to police speech on the internet. I'm simply not going to do it.
I'm just asking you. These are the kind of words, I think they are cruel. I think they hurt President Trump to say that kind of thing. I think it hurts him with trust from the American people. But this is the kind of stuff that's going on right now. And yet you are going after broadcast stations, except for Fox, and making threats.
So we are applying the law. Listen, broadcast TV is fundamentally different than any other forms of media, whether it's cable or podcast or soapbox or man on the street. There's a public trustee model that Congress has set up. When you were on a podcast,
there should be no rules in place when it comes to tech platforms then?
I think there's no public interest obligation. There is no license.
Do you think we should change the laws? Here's one. Last week, President Trump came out with this dangerous and likely illegal AI rule that preempts all the states from doing anything to try to save people, whether it is kids that are being exposed to content they shouldn't see, or fentanyl, or political videos that are lies. So do you think Congress has the authority to preempt state laws, or do you think President Trump and the agencies like yourself have the authority to preempt state law when it comes to the internet and safety with AI?
Well, when it comes to AI in particular, there's an executive order. It asks the FCC to initiate a proceeding. We're going to initiate a proceeding. We're open-minded on where that goes. But look, if you want to step back and talk about weaponization, we saw that for 4 years in the Biden administration. Senate Democrats, including Democrats.
Joe Biden is no longer president. You are head of the FCC, and Donald Trump is president, and I'm trying to deal with this right now. So I would ask you, Ms. Gomez, what are the risks of the commission trying to preempt state laws, particularly when there are no federal guardrails, because our colleagues, despite some good efforts, refuse to pass any kind of even minimal rules when it comes to AI? What are the risks of the commission or a president then trying to preempt state laws that can legally put state laws in place?
Thank you, Senator. I believe that the FCC has very dubious authority to actually preempt state laws in this case, because without a comprehensive federal framework, there is nothing for the FCC to preempt. The Communications Act did not actually talk about artificial intelligence or provide authority to the FCC to do this preemption. So I'm very dubious of our authority to do so. That said, we have sought comment on this.
Okay, thank you very much.
Which ones are scrutinized, and which ones quietly get pressured into silence? At the start of her questioning, Klobuchar makes something very clear. She'd rather be talking about bipartisan priorities like broadband access, spectrum policy, and closing the digital divide. In other words, the FCC's actual job. But she says the events of this year force her to focus on free speech, because what's happening now goes to the heart of our democracy. She reminds Carr of his own words from 2022, when he publicly defended political satire as one of the oldest and most important forms of free expression. Satire, as he said then, challenges those in power and draws people into civic debate. Klobuchar asks him directly whether he still believes that. Carr answers yes. And that's where the contradiction begins, because immediately after affirming that political satire deserves protection, Carr pivots to talking about public interest standards, broadcast rules, and regulatory authority. Klobuchar cuts through that carefully. Her question isn't about abstract rules, it's about conduct. Specifically about Carr going on a podcast after a Jimmy Kimmel monologue and saying ABC could handle the situation the easy way or the hard way. Anyone who understands power dynamics knows why that matters. When the head of a federal agency that controls licenses and merger approvals talks like that, it doesn't sound like neutral enforcement, it sounds like a warning. Klobuchar presses him on whether it's appropriate to use his position to threaten broadcasters over political satire. Carr never gives a straight answer. Then she widens the lens. She points out that under Carr's leadership, the FCC has opened investigations into nearly every major broadcast network except Fox News. Carr claims he doesn't know if that's true, then lists NPR and PBS as examples. But the broader concern remains untouched. Selective scrutiny creates selective pressure, and selective pressure chills speech just as effectively as outright censorship. This is where Klobuchar's line of questioning becomes especially important for viewers at home. She draws a sharp contrast between how Carr treats broadcast satire and how he treats far more dangerous rhetoric online. She references a grotesque post by Donald Trump following a violent attack, one that weaponized conspiracy and dehumanization. She asks a simple but devastating question. If Jimmy Kimmel had said something like that on air, would Carr have threatened consequences? Carr refuses to engage with that comparison. Instead, he accuses Democrats of wanting him to police internet speech. But that's not what Klobuchar is asking. She's exposing the double standard. Broadcast comedians face regulatory intimidation, while inflammatory, misleading, and cruel speech from the most powerful office in the country goes untouched. What viewers need to understand here is the difference between oversight and coercion. Congress questioning regulators is not censorship. Members of Congress writing letters or holding hearings is not the same as a regulator hinting that licenses or mergers could be in jeopardy based on content. The First Amendment doesn't just protect speech from outright bans. It protects against government actions that make speakers afraid to speak in the first place. Klobuchar then moves into even more dangerous territory. Artificial intelligence. She raises the issue of President Trump pushing an AI rule that would preempt state laws meant to protect kids, consumers, and communities from harm. She asks whether the FCC or the president even has the authority to override state protections in the absence of clear federal law. This matters because when federal agencies stretch their authority without guardrails, accountability disappears. A witness confirms what many legal experts already know. The FCC's authority to preempt state AI laws is extremely questionable. The Communications Act doesn't grant it that power. Without Congress acting, any attempt to override state protections risks being not just reckless, but unconstitutional. If you care about a free press, about the First Amendment applying evenly, and about stopping the slow normalization of government intimidation, don't look away from moments like this. Share this video. Talk about it. Hold leaders accountable when they claim to defend free speech with one hand while undermining it with the other. Because democracy doesn't collapse when speech is banned outright. It collapses when people become afraid to speak at all.